clock has started. You got the Chicago Bears. Are you going to shock the world here, or are you going to do what everyone's expecting you, quote unquote, the Bears to do?
I'm not going to shock the world. Number one overall, Caleb Williams is off the board. Everybody kind of figured that was what was going to happen. So the Bears are taking Caleb Williams. It is what it is. Everybody knew this was going to be the pick. I'm not going to shock the world. Even just for my own criteria, I'm going to do what I would do if I was the team, in large part based on need, where I kind of value the draft talent, all those things. And they need a quarterback. He's the best quarterback off the board. If they still had Justin Fields, that might have been interesting. I know that I still have some Fields. So maybe I would have been doing something spicy, but without Fields there, yeah, Caleb's the pick. At number 2, I'm going to be taking another quarterback, and this is the guy who I had as my number 2 quarterback in the class, so probably not surprising. That was Drake May. Once again, Washington needs a QB. We're filling the hole. I know that most of the reports I've seen they're pretty locked in on Jaden Daniels, so I do admit that this is probably not what's actually going to happen in the real draft, but like I said, in terms of my personal opinion, I did have Drake May as my number 2 quarterback in the class, so he will be going at number 2. At number 3, similar thing, Patriots on the clock, need a quarterback. I have heard rumors here that they're actually potentially going to trade back. I don't know if that does happen. Maybe they feel confident that they are okay with one of a few quarterbacks and they think they can get one of them later in the draft, and they're not necessarily sold on anybody at 3. But that's, we're not doing trades, so I will be taking, if I can find him.
He's at 20.
20?
Ranked 20. Or 20.
No, there he is. Jaden Daniels. Yeah, number 3 quarterback in my class. Boom. Once again, another hole that we have filled. The biggest need. Everyone's kind of expecting 3 quarterbacks to go if these 3 stay pat. So, like I said, in the actual draft, I think probably May and Daniels are flipped, but there. And then at number 4, the Arizona Cardinals. You could go a couple different spots here. I think this is where the draft actually opens up and does get interesting. But for me, with the way this roster is currently constructed, you have a quarterback in Kyler Murray who's already, on his rookie extension, so he's got the big money and he's got to produce. And I think the way that you produce is you got to have weapons that he's throwing to. We do have Trey McBride. We have Michael Wilson, but I think we add another receiver into that room, and it's going to be the top receiver that I had on my board, which is Malik Neighbors out of LSU. So recap real quick. Number 1, Bears, Caleb Williams. 2, Drake May to Washington. 3, Jaden Daniels to England. And 4, Malik, Arizona.
Love it, by the way, especially the Malik Neighbors. And I'll share mine. I'll just go ahead and share mine, and then we can review. But anyhow, so I'm not going to shock the world either. Number 1, Caleb Williams. Yeah. We'll just move on. And I think, like you alluded to, I think at 2 is kind of where the draft really starts. And for me, I had Jaden Daniels as my 2nd quarterback, and that's where I'm going to put him with Washington. It is interesting, though, you mentioned that you would put May there, and honestly, wouldn't shock me. I think once again, this is just buzz. Apparently, they had all the quarterbacks visiting and such, and there's apparently some weird things going on. A little bit of a riff per se, reportedly.
Oh, really?
So a little bit. Apparently, they ironed it out too. So it's I don't know. Okay. Who knows? But yeah, regardless if I'm the GM, I take Jaden Daniels just because, like I said, my rankings, he's my 2nd best, and it feels like him and Caleb kind of in a tier up here on their own. Obviously, Caleb's above him. And then I feel like Jaden's kind of in a 2nd tier. That, like you mentioned, the rest are kind of, for me, are, on the next tier, like I mentioned in our quarterback rankings video, which you can go watch if you want more explanation there. But so that leaves the Patriots at 3. And I am in complete agreement with you that prime trade back spot, Patriots need a lot, a lot more than just a quarterback, and especially since these 2 are off the board. I suspect they will, but once again, we don't have trades. So this is where I put in, I know he's my 6th ranked quarterback, but I'm putting in Drake May just because of the upside. And like I said, New England, they got to go through a complete rebuild. And if we're looking at ceilings, I feel like Drake May does have the 3rd highest ceiling. And I had him 6. I was just worried about the consistency, but there ain't much there in New England. So if they don't trade back, I just feel like they go with the more upside guy, iron him out, while they iron out the rest of the team. It's going to be a process. And I think May's one of the younger prospects as well, too, because I know some of the other guys are, in their later 20s, had a couple of COVID years. While May, I believe, is like, 21, 22, which I guess is quote unquote prime quarterback age, I guess. But nonetheless, so we both went top 3 there. And then for me, I also went wide receiver at 4. And this is another one where I trust some of the insiders. I listen to the podcast, and apparently there's some questions about Malik Neighbors. There's a couple off the field things. So in my perfect world, I would take Malik Neighbors here. And this is where I'm letting a little bit of the noise get to me. And I feel like the Cardinals will as well play it safe. I think they're going to go with Marvin Harrison Jr. Already have Michael Wilson. I'm sure they can figure out other ways to get guys in the slot. Like you said, get Kyler his safety blanket at wide receiver, because as good as Michael Wilson was at the end of the year last year, had some injury concerns, going into the process, and you never know how that pans out going forward. So pretty similar for the both of us position wise. I mean, like I said, we both had 3 quarterbacks, the same 3. Jaden and Drake May shuffled. We just both went different wide receivers there, and like I said, in my rankings, once again, we have wide receiver rankings up. I also had Neighbors above Marvin. I'm just, I just feel like the Cardinals may be a little bit coy, like you mentioned, because they're getting into the prime. We got to start making the Kyler years count, since a lot of money's coming off the books, and we got to make this pick look good, essentially.
Right. And I will say about your 4, I think this is probably the most realistic 4. Like I said about mine, I think that some of these things are swapped. I think Marvin's more likely to go at. Yeah, I think yours is. And speaking of a lack of realism, my next 2 picks feel strange because it doesn't feel like this is going to line up like this. But at 5, we've got the Los Angeles Chargers. They've got a lot of needs. I thought about maybe grabbing a corner here, maybe a defensive lineman, because Bosa deals with injuries. Khalil Mack's not getting any younger, so maybe add some weapons there. Maybe you can bolster the offensive line to keep Justin Herbert upright longer. I know that they haven't had the greatest of right tackles throughout the year, but at pick number 5, with Marvin Harrison Jr. staring in the face, I had the Chargers selecting him. So, like I said, I think realistically, Neighbors is probably going to be the wide receiver left, and Marvin will be gone at 4, and that might change things for Arizona or for the Chargers here. But with Marvin Harrison there, I have them selecting him at number 5. And that's also this might be an overreaction to the Keenan Allen, Mike Williams stuff. But I'm just not sold that they're going to come into the year with their starting receiver room being Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, and everybody else. And I'm a Quentin Johnston believer, but rookie year did not show that much promise. So unless he's making huge strides in camp, I wonder if they might try to readjust here with pick 5. The only reason I do feel like realistically they might not take receiver because they did get Jim Harbaugh as their coach, and I feel like he's the kind of coach that does value really running the rock, and for that reason, I could see them potentially going Joe Alt, the tackle. But I didn't end up doing that. And like I said, it does continue to be a little unrealistic because I actually have another receiver off the board here with the Giants, and I have Rome Odunze coming off the board. The reason I feel like this is unrealistic because I start with 3 quarterbacks and 3 receivers, and that feels like something that would happen in Madden and not actually in real life. So it could. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it doesn't feel likely that this is what's going to happen. So I don't know. It felt like I said, if I was the GM of these teams, that's what I would be doing. If I'm the Giants and I'm still committed to Daniel Jones for at least another year, and for me in their scenario at 6, I don't feel comfortable necessarily reaching on one of the other quarterbacks that I think they could get more in the middle of the first round or the back half of the first round. So if I was going to try and go after a quarterback, I'd be trading out of the spot because there's a lot of prime talent here. You can get the first tackle, you can get, a top corner, or top edge rusher, whoever you want. Somebody could trade up for that guy here, right? So if I'm not going after a quarterback to replace Daniel Jones, and that means that we're at least sticking with him in this scenario, I'm going to get a weapon to help him out because the Giants receiver room has been pretty pitiful for quite some time. So we're going to get my 3rd receiver off the board in Washington, and hopefully he can pan out for them. Like I said, I don't think this top 6 is that realistic, but this is where we are. At number 7, this one felt easy. We're throwing Joe Alt to the Tennessee Titans. They need a lot of things. Tackle is certainly one of them. Top tackle off the board. It felt like the most plug and play thing. pretty much ever. It's a Notre Dame offensive lineman too. Guys always tend to be stuck. So I'm not going to overthink that one. Like I said, I think there's a potential he could go anywhere from like 3 to 6, like before my pick that I actually took him. But yeah, we're going to have him go to the Tennessee Titans. And then the Atlanta Falcons, this one was also interesting. I feel like there's a lot of different ways they could have gone, but they have not. I'm pretty sure that the last 5 years, essentially, I don't think they've had a single pass rusher get double-digit sacks. A single one. I think the last time they had a pass rusher get double-digit sacks, 2018 with Vic Beasley.
I was about
Correct
to say,
me if I'm wrong.
I think I feel like you're right because I'm trying to remember their D tackle that was really solid for them though, but he never really
Grady Jarrett.
Grady Jarrett was always solid, but I don't think he ever had like a monster double-digit sack year.
I think he had like 8.5, 9, those kind of years, but he never was getting the double digits. And even the Vic Beasley year was kind of a one-hit wonder thing. So I have them taking my top edge rusher off the board. I might be butchering his name. Latu. I think that's how it's pronounced. I could be wrong, but
pretty solid.
Top edge rusher off the board for me out of UCLA, something that we talked about a lot last year and some of the previous years when we were comparing like Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson and all these guys. Bend was a really important thing. I think he's got it. That's like out of all the edge rushers that were off the board, to me, the bend from him was definitely the best. He's got a lot of moves. His production was fantastic. I know that some of the other names in this class are maybe a little bit bigger because of maybe the schools they went to and the pedigree they had, but I think that he's the best edge rusher in the class, and I think that Atlanta has sorely needed one throughout the years, and I'm pretty sure I actually mocked them to take an edge rusher last year too, and then they took Bijan Robinson. So who knows what Atlanta does, but you got Kirk Cousins, you got Pitts, you got Drake London, you got Bijan. Your offensive line's good. If they take offense here, I'm very disappointed at Atlanta. You should be bolstering up your defense here. Can't get after the opposing quarterback. It's going to be hard to win. So that is my next set of 4. Any thoughts?
All right. We didn't get to talk much about tackles and edge rushers, so this will be a good, fun conversation regardless. Love the Joe Alt pick for Tennessee, and I am in agreement with you. It feels like, especially 5, like I wouldn't be shocked if the Chargers do trade back. Maybe we'll talk later about some of these teams that we think may trade up, because there's a grouping later on that's like one of these teams probably is going to get antsy, move up so that, and because they're scared that one of these other teams will. But yeah, then Latu. He was my number 2 edge rusher. Once again, we didn't get to really go over our rankings for that. But I don't mind him there at 8. I think he reminds me, like, even he had some medicals. His paths have been very similar to like a Jalen Phillips, where he had a couple of medical issues. That's why he fell off for a couple of years. But very much like even his film, though, and the way he plays is very much like a Jalen Phillips, and we see how good he is there. And I think he's a little bit of a bigger Jalen Phillips too. So yeah, I think, like you mentioned, obviously Atlanta's been desperate for that, so that's a very good fit there for them as well. Yeah, that's and I don't mind the Roma Dunes one too, because Giants kind of need a reliable receiver, right? To even whether it's Daniel Jones or whoever else at quarterback. So,
and I will say too, I felt pretty strongly that if I feel like the Chargers pick is a spot where we could see someone trade back, or the Cardinals, one of those two. Yeah. Like I've heard a lot of rumors of Minnesota, who have the 11th pick and the 23rd, I believe. They've got 2 first-round picks, maybe using that ammo to trade up and go get like a JJ McCarthy or something. If you watched our quarterback thing, my opinions on that. But because we're not doing the trades, obviously that's kind of where I went. But I do think that, some of these spots are prime real estate for a trade-up scenario. Yeah, what about your next set of 4? Chargers.
All right, so Chargers on the clock. This is where, and you kind of alluded to this with the Jim Harbaugh stuff. This is why I went offensive line, so I went Joe Alt. Yeah, whether he's going to play on left or right side, it's Jim Harbaugh. It's the way he built the Niners, was building them through the trenches. And I do like some of the D linemen in this class. I have one in like top 10 consideration, but it just feels like you've invested in Justin Herbert, protect your investment in Joe Alt. And then you have how am I blinking on Rashawn Slater? Yeah, he's been really good on the left side, and then you have Alt too, and then usually you can fill in the interior later in the draft too. I'm sure you can find a guy or two.
They still got Zion Johnson at left guard.
He was really solid
first round pick for them. Corey Linsley, I don't know his health status because
I think he retired.
Retired? Okay, yeah, that's what I didn't know. So, but once again, those interior spots, like you said, you can address that later.
Yeah, and they'll be picking on top of the second. I'm assuming third too, so they can address that then at a more appropriate time. So went with the meathead pick there. Moving to the Giants, I'm with you. I don't think they go quarterback. They're kind of stuck with Daniel Jones, and you still got to make the situation good for the next quarterback, regardless of who you put out there. This is where I went Malik Neighbors, just because, play in the slot outside, so he fills a lot of roles for that, and he can be their alpha receiver, or at least go-to receiver threat in that Brian Dable offense, and presumably Daniel Jones at quarterback, or where else is back there. But yeah, at least get your weapon that you're going to need to be a successful offense going forward, regardless who's behind center. So moving to 7 is where I also gave the Titans a tack on with J.C. Latham out of Alabama, because he can play either side. I feel like he's definitely the more ceiling kind of guy, where he's a little bit raw, but I felt like he got better throughout the year, the college year, at technique and such, especially in pass protection. I think he's a monster in the run game, and I won't be shocked if the Titans kind of lean more towards that with Will Levis, but I think he could develop into a solid left tackle. But worst case, they play him on the right side, and he's a really good right tackle. So I feel like it's not as much of a risky pick, but he could be. I mean, I think he could be better than Joel, but he's not better than him right now. If that makes sense. So
right.
Tennessee, once again, kind of in a rebuild, build through the trenches, probably get a receiver. Maybe they can trade that up at the end of the first, or get one in the second as well, if they want to pair one there. And they already got Calvin Ridley, so they've addressed that in free agency. Anyway, at 8, I'm in agreement with you. I felt like the edge was a desperate need for Atlanta. I have a different number 1 edge guy, and that is Dallas Turner out of Alabama. I think like I said, him and Latu are very close 1-2 for me. I think Latu is definitely probably the more well-polished prospect as of right now, especially as a pass rusher. Turner's a little more raw. I think he's, especially technique-wise, but I think that's something they can clean up. And once again, I think a little more upside and meat on the bone, I feel like, with Dallas Turner, as well as not as scary medicals and such. So going with the double Alabama there at the end. And outside of really the Chargers, we were very similar there in terms of positions, right. Just a couple of different spots. So once again, as I always say, we're hanging out too much, I think. But also, though, this does kind of feel like a little bit consensus, like both of us position-wise, maybe different names, but thus far kind of feels like we're on the same page as everyone else. Just, like we always say, different preferences.